this evening for what is truly an incredible event. I wanted to thank Nadine for organizing it, and we have the opportunity to, of course, hear this incredible story from Mr. Greenfield and Mr. Steinkeller. And it's just, I know I'm so moved already by the thought of what we are really going to be speaking about it and thinking about tonight as we mark Yom Hashoa and hear your incredible story. So I'll hand it over to Nadine in just a moment to introduce the evening. I just wanted to note two logistical components, well maybe three. As you can see, we have a great turnout, which is fantastic. We may have some folks trickling in, and so we'll just try to make the spots available as much as we can. Also, we do, as you can see, have the microphone set up. They're making a little bit of an echo, but we'll try to make sure that audio is as clear as possible. Please let us know if there are any challenges with that. And finally, as you can see also in the back, we are grateful to have Andrew here who is filming this so that not only are we all able to hear this incredible story, but that we are able to share it with others as well. So we will now have Nadine will introduce the evening. After we have this portion, we will conclude with the lighting of 6 memorial candles, and Andy Binstad will lead us in a special prayer, special memorial prayer.
Thank you so much. And before we start, I was just reminded to remind everybody to please silence your cell phones. Thank you. So I want to start with a story. About a little over a year ago, last February, my father, Aaron, came to this area. He lives in Boston now. Came to this area to speak at my children's day school, Milton. And he spent the day there on Friday, and then we spent Shabbat like we normally spend here. And we came on Saturday morning, and after services, Andrew, where are you, Andrew? Andrew, Apostolou, stopped me and said, I met your dad. Where's he from? And I said, Poland. And he said, but where in Poland? And I said, Galicia, like, most of people, a lot of people say Galicia. And he said, but where in Galicia? And I said, this little small town, Szczakowa. And he paused for a second and he said, Szczakowa? With a different accent. And I said, yes, because that is the way I always grew up hearing it. He said, yeah, did you know that there's a gentleman in our shul, in our very own shul from Szczakowa? What? I've been here for, how many years have we been here? 10 years? 7 years? 8 years? And I had never known that there was somebody from this town, which I feel so deeply connected to from many, many years of stories growing up, listening to my dad about the tales and the horrors of Szczakowa. So I said, who is it? And he said, his name is Jerry Steinkeller. And I ran over to my dad. Jerry had already left. He was there that day, davening in the same place. And I ran over to my father and I said, did you know a guy named Jerry Steinkeller from Szczakowa? And he said, of course, he was my childhood friend. And I know many of you have heard that story, but I think that telling it, not Jerry, his name was Ignaz. Ignaz, let me get the story right, but Jerry goes by Jerry. He's got to watch me. So Ignaz Steinkeller. But I know that even the millionth time that I've told this story, I still get so emotional thinking about just the prospect of the two of them seeing each other. So the next day, we called Jerry on the phone. It was Shabbat when we had not seen him. So the next morning, my dad called him on the phone. And if I can just poke fun for a second, listening to two 90-somethings talk on the phone, I don't want to blast your ears out, but it was what, who, a little bit of that. But my dad said, it's Aaron Grunfeld from Szczakowa. And you could hear Jerry on the other line, what? Where are you? What are you talking about? And he said, I'm a mile away from you. So we went to his house. And this is the most poignant moment for me. I had grown up listening, as I said, to all of these stories about Szczakowa and about my dad's family and about the town. And I actually interviewed him. I went to Brandeis and lived only about 20 minutes from my parents. And He came every week to Brandeis, and we would videotape and record his oral testimony. So we probably have about 100 hours of testimony with my father, asking millions of questions. What did this look like? What did the house look like? What did the outhouse look like? I mean, everything you could imagine. But the one thing he always told me was that his friends called him Arik. And I had never heard anybody call him Arik before. My mother doesn't. His sister didn't even call him Arik. Nobody called him Arik. We get to Jerry's house. We knock on the door. Jerry opens the door and says, Arik, with big, wide, open arms, and they embraced. And so here we are tonight, and thank you to Maharat Ruth and to Rabbi Hertzfeld and to Sarah, to everybody for allowing this program to happen. So it's a tough day, right? Yom Hashoa is very solemn, but I'm so happy. I'm so happy to see so many people here, because what I've been saying, over the last couple of weeks, but also many years, and I'm sure many of you share this sentiment, we will have books and movies and websites and all of those things for a gazillion years, but we only have our survivors for so long, and may they live till 120. So I'm going to start this evening talking to Aaron and Jerry, and I'm probably going to call him Dad. And the way we're going to do it is I'm going to interview them a little bit. I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to try to go in sort of chronological order, so that we can get a sense of the picture. We may go back and forth a little bit, but at the end of that, we'll show some of their pictures, and then we'll open it up to all of you for any questions. So please keep in mind any questions you might have. So I'm going to start. Jerry, hi. I just want to start with asking each of you a few words about your family, about echoing back. Now, Jerry grew up in a different town, actually, and then moved later. But Jerry, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your family, about your parents, maybe about religion, how it played into it, business, the town, and speak into the microphone.
My parents and I lived in Silesia, in a larger town, and but summer vacations I used to spend with my grandparents in this little town of Synagogue. And this was a real Yiddish town. People went to, the shul was called Beis Medrash, and everybody on Shabbos went to the Beis Medrash. It was a very close-knit town, and there was a lot of friendship and cohesion until the war broke out and until the Nazis came in, because things changed drastically after that. First of all, young people were the first ones that were deported to labor camps, and then a year later, people were rounded up and were taken to different camps, and the Germans had a name for it, Judenrein, in other words, cleansed of Jews. That's what they called it. And that was the end of the town.
Can you tell us a little bit about your family, siblings, your parents, what they did? Give us a picture of your family.
Well, my father had a roofing business shop. He worked, the sheet metal and roofing business. And so did my grandfather in this little town. So everybody, in Polish they called it the blacharz. And everyone knew, it was a small town, people were very close together. On Saturday afternoon you could see kids taking out from the bakery the children for the Saturday afternoon meal.
I don't know if everybody caught that, but that's a story that I also grew up hearing from my dad, that everybody would bring their cholent to the local bakery on Friday afternoon and then pick it up after shul on the way home to have their cholent for lunch. I think that's such a special memory. Yeah, well, because we can't cook my father wants to make sure that everybody understands that you dropped it off because you couldn't not cook on Shabbat. So the ovens went all night, through the night, and it cooked. And that's a real tradition, the chola. It's maybe not in a crock pot, but at the local bakery. Imagine carrying your crock pot, by the way, like all the way, to your friend's house every time. And Jerry, you had a sister. You had a sister,
Yes.
right? Rosa?
Yeah,
Or Rosa?
well, my sister, after the war, emigrated to Israel, and she lived there until she passed away in Israel some years ago. I have nieces and nephews in Haifa.
Dad, why don't you give us a brief picture of your family and your life in the town, religion?
I was born in Dukla, not Shtakova. I was born in a town not too far from the Czech border. But at the age of 2, my parents decided they want to move to where we lived in Shtakova because of business. They opened up a store 20 kilometers away from our town, but they didn't want to live in the big town because they were afraid that we were going to become very less religious. So they kept us in a small town of Shtakova. I come from a family of 9 children. I get to the point basically about the Holocaust. And 9 children, mother and father, the only one survived is myself and my sister Sarah. And one sister survived. And she lived here and she passed away, 8 years ago. In this country, she was very sick and also from the concentration camp. Everybody was wound up in Auschwitz, and I never saw them again. It's a long story, so I'm not going to.
Well, we're gonna get to some of that. I asked about religious observance because I think it's interesting. An interesting part of this tale here, or not tale, but of this real story, is that my dad grew up in a Babavar Hasidic family, very religious, although very modern. They worked, both his father and his mother, I should say, worked, but they were Babavers. Jerry, you grew up in what was sort of a traditional but more secular kind of family, right? You went to shul, but not as religious.
Well, Pesach we read Avadim Hayinu, and we were Avadim during the war.
Tell us, Dad, maybe you could start because I know you spent many years in Cheder, in Jewish school. And I'm wondering if you could just tell us maybe a little bit about what that Cheder looked like and what was the,
All right.
what was it like?
Everybody hear me all right? Okay. Because my wife always complains I talk too
She's
slow.
not here. Hi, Mama.
She got the report. Anyway, so I gotta talk louder. Anyway, as I said, I come from a family of 9 children, and my parents, we moved, and at the age of 2, I moved to Shtakova. I lived in Dukla, which was a nice little town, except for some reason, on my mother's side, the family lived actually before the war in Auschwitz. It was called Oshvinchi. They had a beautiful life there because they were very educated, because at that time they didn't have any problems going to school, to both schools, to Yiddish school and non-Jewish schools. Anyway, so
You were talking about the Cheder.
okay. So when I was 2 years old. Then we had, after I was the 5th in the family, and there were 4 more children after that were born in Shtakova. And I went to Cheder at the age of 3. I had long hair just like my grandson right now. and I had blonde hair, and I had a pacifier in my mouth, I remember, and they walked me over to, it was a small town, there were no cars then. they walked me over on a Sunday afternoon to the Cheder. And the Cheder, it was unfortunately, because being as religious as we were, I actually studied my first year in Cheder, was like a basement in a horrible little house, because the people, the rabbi, his father, who was a shoemaker, and they lived there and they ate there. It was just unbelievable. But poverty, in other words. And after that, I went a few years in Cheder, and I learned the Aleph base, and then I went to first grade. Should I go on?
Well, we're gonna talk. We'll get to sort of the older. One thing that I always am interested to hear about, and we're spending time on before the war because I think it's so important for us to really try to channel what life was really like for them and how it so abruptly changed. So one question I have, Jerry and Dad, is about your interaction with Polish kids, teachers, adults. What was the relationship like, both good and bad, with your Polish neighbors? Because that, as we all know, has always been, you hear horrible stories and you hear the wonderful, righteous Gentile stories. So I'm interested, maybe Jerry can start.
You start first, okay.
Well, the worst experience, aside from the camps and all the other things, the worst experience was having to witness the execution by hanging of a young man in our town by the name of Aaron Diamant.
That was in Shakova, yeah. Well, that's,
And that, I have this vision in front of me to this day.
This is a story I also grew up hearing. I hate to say it, as a small child, about Aaron Diamant. It's a name that I will never, never, never forget. And when I heard Jerry talk about it for the first time,
well,
I felt...
I knew the family very well because I lived in that town, and so I knew the brothers and the sisters, and I even played with some of them. Aaron Diamant, and he came from a family also very religious, and for some reason, during the war, the first year in 1939, he decided he bought some coals from a non-Jew, a Polish guy, and the Polish guy stole it from the wagons or something because there was starvation, we were hungry and cold, and they were caught. They caught him and they called the whole little town, as many people as they could, to see what would happen to you if anybody else would try to do something like it, steal from the Deutsche Reich, as they say, from the German, Nazis. And they had played music. I happened to watch it because they made me watch it because I was right in the barracks of the soldiers. They told me I was cleaning the windows. And at that age, I was only about 14. I just became 14. Or 13 rather, I'm sorry, 13. And they made me watch, stop working, watch what's going on, they told me. And they hung actually 21 people. You remember that? 21 people. Not just one, not just him alone. The others were not Jewish. They hung them too. But I remember the Jewish guy, they asked him, what do you want to say? Before we hang you. And he says, I want to say the Shema. What? And he says, Shema Yisrael, Ad Hashem Eloheinu, Ad Hashem Echad. And they hung him, and that was the end. He was from a very nice family, a well-to-do family, very educated and very, very religious too. This is just the beginning. Can I go on?
Let's,
Okay, I'll just go on.
do you want to say maybe a few words, and we'll come back to Jerry, about the children at school, what it was like, the anti-Semitism as it was growing?
Okay.
The interesting thing here is that in Shakova, we all know the dates of the war, right? The beginning of the war was September 1st, 1939. The end of the war was May 8th, 1945. And the Germans rolled in to Shakova on September 1st, 1939. So what happened?
Our town was the first one to be occupied by the Germans because we were right on the border, 20 kilometers away. And I saw I saw them come in, and I knew the Polish army in my town. They were practically on horses, and these people came in with motorcycles, tanks, and I said to myself, my God, how is Germany going to, how is Poland going to win a war with those people? It was ridiculous. They were like on horse and buggy in comparison. And in a way, at that time I had revenge because I hated my people in Poland, the non-Jews, because they hated me. Every time I went out to the street when I was about 5, 6 years old, I didn't feel it then. When I went to school, 7th, 8th, or 9th grade, not, what am I saying, 7, 8, I never went that far. But I went to concentration camp. Like 4th and 5th grade, I had to run for my life because there was we went to school in Europe. You had 65 people in a room, and you studied, and then it was time to go home. And on the way back, especially, it was a day of religion, Catholic religion. They were wild up, and some of the bullies would run after me. It's a good thing I had big brothers. I used to tell them, wait for me near the school, so I will make it home. This was my life. I also want to tell you, I was not a very good student, especially starting in the 4th grade. And I'll tell you why, very simply. It's not my fault in a way. I'll tell you why, because I had so much problems in school, trying to go to school, trying to learn, and every time I came there, somebody was picking on me. Either when they were getting older, like in the 4th grade, trying to have fun and pulling my payas. I had payas, I had long hair, not a shaved hair, which the others did not, and I sit in a kippah. So there was a reason for kids that age if they were not trained. America is a wonderful country. When I came to this country, I don't want to change the subject, I just want to go back. I said to myself, gee, this is a wonderful country. There's so many people more they can pick on by the time they get to me. It's the truth, because there's so many people that say, she just wanted to hate the Irish, this and that, and so forth. So I felt pretty good. And by that time when I came here, this didn't even bother me, as long as they don't, anyway, I don't want to go on.
Jerry, you told me when we talked about anti-Semitism the other day, we spent some time together, and you told me some of the sayings that the Polish kids used to say to you. Do you remember what the sayings were?
Well, they used to mock us and make fun of us, and many people had payout, so they made fun especially of that.
So did I,
They had a special word in Polish for it, an insult. That was a usual thing, and kids were going to hate it to school, so they were subjected to insults and sometimes physical attacks in the small towns.
Yeah, but but he went to town in a big town. It's different than in my little town.
Right. But it's still the sayings, Jerry. The ones about you're a Jewish rash. What was it? Żydzi parv. Do you remember what you were telling me?
Żydzi parszywe.
Parshiva,
yeah.
right? And are you afraid of us? And really drumming you, keeping you going. Okay, let's move on a little bit. I want to talk about something that I think both of these gentlemen felt so strongly about or learned to feel strongly about as children or as teenagers, I guess, pre-teenagers, and do today. I want to talk about Zionism. before the war. So, Jerry, you have a wonderful story to tell.
Anti-Semitism is not new. It
The
goes back,
Zionism.
it goes back centuries. Hatred of Jews and persecution of Jews in various countries, and in so many different forms.
Yes.
So this
Jerry,
way-
I'm changing subjects a little bit to Zionism and Beitar, what you told me about Beitar,
well,
and I'd
that
love for
was,
you to share about that.
Well, the movement in Europe started with Zionism, and there were different organizations, different factions, Zionists. There was Hanauer Hatzioni, Beitar, which was, they were called fascists in a way because Jabotinsky, in a different way, he said only Badam Ba'ish. Yehuda Takum, Badam Ba'ish, Yehuda Takum.
Blood and fire.
That was the slogan at the time. So there are differences of opinion by many of the Zionist organizations, but the aim was to create a Jewish state.
Jerry, you told me some stories that you told me that when I asked you the other day, what are your most happy memories from before the war? What made you happy? You told me about going to Zionist camp, right? To the camp. So to the Zionist camp, Beitar camp, summer camp. Can you sang for me the song that you used to sing. Can you sing it for us? He sang it amazingly, and it was really moving to hear that he's still. Just so you know, I asked him if I could ask him to sing it. So I don't know.
It was an education in a sense,
Okay. Okay.
and it formed our sense of identity.
Don't you remember the songs from it? Don't you remember the songs that you were singing there?
No.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to sing it. So, Dad, you were in a different
I was
Zionist
also,
movement.
I came, like I said, this was already good days because Zionism was becoming very popular because of anti-Semitism, and the wave of anti-Semitism was coming already from across the border from Germany. So life was, then all of a sudden everybody when some of them that were, let's say, regular Hasidim, some of them changed to Zionism, but there was a different kind of a Mizrahi, which was religious. They were doing the tefillin in the morning, they went to shul, and at the same time they were also learning how to march and even maybe how to shoot. I don't know exactly, I don't remember that, but I belonged to the Mizrahi because my brothers belonged to the Mizrahi. I had older brothers, 3 more older brothers, and I was like the 5th in line.
The Germans had a slogan, Die Juden sind unser Unglück.
Yeah.
In other words, we were their misfortune. The Jews were the misfortune of the Germans and the world in general.
Yeah, what he says is right,
So,
because
all the ills of the world were always blamed on the Jews.
Yeah, every like he said, every wall in the street was saying, Jews to Palestine. Jews, you are, what the Germans started to write in their language or in Polish language, the Jews are our misfortune. Die Juden sind unser Unglück, as they say in German. And speaking of German, and my parents, it just goes to show, I am not changing the subject, I'm just going to say, sometimes we're making a mistake saying the Germans are bad, the Polish are bad, this is bad. It's not the people, it's the regime. To give you an example, and like I said, I'm not changing the subject. Joseph McCarthy. Do anybody know who Joseph McCarthy is?
You're changing the subject.
No, I just want to tell you a story about it. My own story about it. I was walking home from I worked in a meat company, and I was walking home. I always tried to walk through the Park Street in Boston, and there was the what do you call it? The grass and all that.
A public square.
The
or
public
something
square.
Like
And I
Common.
passed by and I hear this man talking. By that time I already understood a little bit of English. And I listened to him talk. And I came home and I said to myself, my God, I just came from one trouble and it's following me. The same thing, this is how it happened. The same way. The Jews have all the money, the Jews took your money, the Jews are using you, and so forth and so on. And I said to myself, my God, what do I do? Then I took the forwards, I couldn't read English. So I used to get the forwards because my brother-in-law used to get it and he wrote. So I got the news, I always read the news. And I saw who McCarthy is. Okay, I'm just good. So the point is that it started over here too. Because why? Because of the war, because this and that. So anyway, so
Okay.
I was a little scared about, did I make a mistake? I should have gone to Israel. Yeah, anyway.
Which we'll definitely address a little later on. I want to move forward
Yeah,
to the
okay.
ghetto and to concentration camps and to deportation. Jerry, could you tell us about your first months in the ghetto? You went to Kshanuf, right? You went to Kshanuf, it became a ghetto, right?
Well,
Can you tell us a little bit about leaving your family, when you left your family and how that happened?
Well, there were so many restrictions, and then all of a sudden they decided to expel all the Jews from this town. And they forced the younger people went to labor camps, and the rest of the people went to a larger town. And they used to gather people like that and more concentrated. And this made it easier for them eventually to round up people and deport them to extermination camps.
Can you tell us the last time that you saw your mother, for instance?
I wish I knew how to answer that. It's very difficult to put it into any philosophical terms,
Understand.
especially if you experience things personally and such.
I understand. Dad, one of the stories, one of the things that you've told me about so many times is being in the ghetto in Pasterniak, it was called. And we're fast forwarding a little bit. They had lived in ghetto quarters for quite a while. Many families in just one apartment, smushed together. And when I say families, we're talking about families of 11 people in some cases. And my father's father and older brothers had already been taken. So I'm fast forwarding a little bit to ask you about the day of selection at Pasterniak. You were with your mother,
Yeah.
your one older sister, and all of your younger
Well,
siblings.
anyway, they expelled us very simply. And they, one day they just came in and they started to scream everybody out, take all the furniture, take it outside, and leave it there. And break whatever you have, which they already took everything from us anyway, the gold and the rings and the money, whatever they could. There was nothing left except starvation. So they said, just out, everybody out. It was 10 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning. And take all the furniture, leave it out. This was for the neighbors, whoever wants it, they can have it. And they said, get in line. And we walked 3 kilometers away. Just goes to show what a ghetto is. A ghetto could be next house of you. You wouldn't even know it's a ghetto. Then it's just watched over. Anyway, and they emptied a few houses in a farmhouse, in a farmland. And they told the whole town, this was already when my father and my 3 brothers were already in camp. It didn't call concentration camp, but it was labor camp. They were still getting food, but still they were being shot and beaten too. So anyway, what happened is they took us there and we lived over there. I lived there for about 8 months. I worked in a tannery with Michael Sellinger. Michael.
With another childhood
Another
friend of
mine,
theirs.
good friend of mine. And we worked in a tannery, and then we went back to the house, and we had in this room, for instance, which wasn't that high up, no basement, no nothing, about 3 European Jewish families. That means probably about 30 people. We slept on the floor, we slept on tables, and we lived like this. And I'm not going to go on.
So tell us though about the selection moment, because I think
Okay,
that is
all
a
right,
very
so,
poignant
this is very
moment.
important, because this was already 1942. And I went there in October 1941. In 1942, I think, in the middle of the year, they told everybody to come out. There was a selection. Everybody that reads books knows what the selection is. To the left and to the right, like the song goes. And mach schnell, schnell, and they hit you, they stand in line, the woman on one side, with the babies on the other side. The man, they look you over like you are a cow to be bought for slaughter or something. And they look, and my mother, Sholom, said to me, take your shorts off. And I was, in shorts because it was May. And put on long pants so you look older, so they would not take you to Auschwitz. So parents knew already, and there's nothing you could do. We already knew that is the death. And my mother tells me, go to the concentration camp and save yourself. Like to say, she didn't say that in words, but I knew what she meant. So myself and Michael Sellinger, which is a friend of ours, was sitting in that. Next to me was another boy. His name was also Aaron Hashoa, and he was skinny. I was also skinny, but I had a round face and still some life in my face. So I looked pretty good. Rechts, links, right, left. And I wound up going to the concentration camp. But my parents went another direction with my sister Deborah. She was taller than I was beautiful girl, blonde hair. She could have, if she wasn't so naive and so honest, she could have said that she's Irish. German. On top of it, she couldn't speak Yiddish because she was already brought up a different way. And she said, no, I'm going with my mother. And my sister and myself went to the concentration camp.
Older sister.
Just a reminder, my older sister, she was 4 years older. Just to remind you, but by that time, my parents, my father, and 3 brothers were already in concentration camps. Work camps, it's called. It doesn't matter. Before I got my stripes, they gave me, before my striped uniform, they used to take my own clothes, they cut out a Jewish star on it, or paint a star, and there were times where they used to shave me completely, and take the hair off, and then shave like a hippie more or less, in the middle. So if somebody sees me in the street and take my head off, they know I escaped. And after that, they changed me into the stripes, and I was going to, and that was it. I was in 9 camps, okay, so I don't want to go.
And that moment, though, was the last time you saw your mother,
last time, right.
your younger brothers,
Right.
Bubek, Lilek,
Right.
Devorah, and Rivka.
I didn't see Deborah, which was younger than I am. My older sister went also to the concentration camp because they told her go to the right, and she survived. She died in this country. And
Rivka was 4
and
years
Rivka
old.
was 4 years old. She was already 5, maybe 5. And I can remember, I never forget that picture because they always did so fast and go around with a whip like you would whip a lion with it. And quick, and they took my little sister and threw her on a truck like a piece of garbage, excuse me. And I never saw her again. So that's
So,
There was a German policeman in Stockholm who used to love to humiliate people. He would stop people in the street,
oh yeah.
hit people sometimes, force them off the sidewalk, or makes them clean the sidewalk with a toothbrush or things of that nature, just to humiliate
just for
people.
fun.
The fun. And also,
I remember his name, but I don't want to mention it.
speaking of I have to bring this out. I went to school with a Polish, he was not a Jew, he was a Polish Catholic. And so one day I decided when we were in the ghetto, even in Stakova, before I went to the ghetto, and I lived in my own house, you couldn't go out more than 2 hours a day. On a Sunday afternoon, it was a nice day, I took my hat off and I put my hat on so they wouldn't see that I'm shaved, because that's why I already had to shave my head. Not shave, but at least have no hair. And I decided I'm going to go to near the church and buy some food. I think something my mother gave me to sell it for change for food. That was, we used to have my mother before the war, they used to have a store and they sold material for clothing and stuff like that. So it was a piece of clothing. Anyway, a guy, his name was Vielgus, the last name. He went to school with me. And he saw me, couldn't speak a word of German. I could, but anyway, he walked over to the German policeman with the German Shepherd, and I never had a dog, and I was scared of dogs anyway. And he said to the German, Jude, Jew. And the German grabbed me, and he hit me, and the dog jumped on me. He didn't do anything to me, but he says, you go to the police station right now. I'll be there and I'll check if you're there. If you're not there, I'll come after you. You couldn't run anywhere. I wound up in the police station shoveling coal in a like a little 2x4 room for the ovens, for the police. They could have winter, whatever it is. Anyway, shoveling coal, they gave me some food. My parents didn't know what happened to me. There were no phones. They could care less about telling my parents what happened to their son. So my parents figured I was already dead, and you have to trade 3 days to let me go. They beat me up a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. And then from that time, it's all downhill.
Jerry, 2 of the camps that you were in were the same 2 camps that my father was in. You both were in Markstedt and Finnefteichen together.
Yes.
And those were your first 2 camps. Those were not my father. My father had already been to a few camps before that.
I've been around to 5 camps by then.
But Jerry, can you tell us about Markstedt and about Baruch Meister? I think that you both have talked about Baruch Meister, but I think that it's an interesting...
Markstedt was a so-called labor camp.
Yeah. It's called labor camp, but it doesn't
The
matter.
difference being that it was under the jurisdiction of the German army instead of the SS. They were strict, strict discipline, but it was under the leadership. They appointed a man, in fact, from our town as a leader of this camp. He was called Lagerältester, that was his title, and the inner administration was ran by him, and he had some people that helped. Unfortunately, some of the supervisors, they were overzealous, and sometimes they they exceeded their, authority, and they beat up people, which happened in these camps. So that was an unfortunate situation. Things were created in such a way that to make everybody more fearful, and food, of course, was a primary problem. Everybody was hungry. No one was getting enough to eat. So that's and labor, of course. Depending upon where you were assigned, outdoor people had inadequate clothing, and in bad weather, in cold weather, it was difficult to work outdoors in construction and other places. Especially if we were kicked or beaten at the same time. So that made it difficult.
And Baruch Meister was from your town, right? Baruch Meister was from Shtakova,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, Boris.
And he helped both of you very much during that camp, right? He protected you at
Well,
times.
Yeah.
He helped some people. He couldn't help everybody,
Yeah,
and
well-
conditions were difficult.
Of course.
He only had so much authority. He had to
Yeah. He was pretty
abide
fair.
by the rules of the
Yeah.
Of course.
camp commandant and all the. So he was criticized by many people,
Yeah.
and he was praised by other people. I can honestly say he helped me in some
He
way.
did too. He was
But,
pretty fair.
Was an exception. That's because he knew my family, he knew me. That's
Yeah.
so. But in general, conditions for everyone were very difficult. Working outdoors with inadequate clothing and cold weather. It's
Do you want to give
What
us
else
an
can I say?
example, Jerry, from any of your experiences during the concentration camps? Would you like to share one or two stories about during the camps?
Well, my recollection is that I was punished. I received 25 lashes on my bare back for an infraction. It was more it was painful, but it was very humiliating at the same time. So, what can I say?
And I'm just
And,
asking a question. When you got 25 lashes, what camp was it, do you remember? When you got the 25 lashes?
The marks of the Fifth-Titan.
It was in Fifth Eichen?
Yeah, and
No.
from Fifth-Titan to Gross Rosen,
Yeah, no, to me it was...
and from Gross Rosen to Flossenburg.
Dad, do you want to share a couple of your stories?
Yeah, okay, stories. Well, I can...
All I can say
You
is
could also
read.
talk about-
Read. There's stuff available. This morning I was in the Holocaust Museum. I went with someone. Just a pilgrimage.
Yeah. Anyway,
Well, that's-
Do you want to talk about
It's very hard to put all these experiences
maybe
into
the
words.
lashes and the open windows or something?
Yeah.
Just tell maybe one story. We're going to keep going, but
I just want to tell you about Burek Meister, what he did for me, well, they might have not killed me, but beat me very badly. I'll try to make it very simple. I got a job, lucky job, that there was an engineer, not engineer, what do you call a guy that they build roads, and the man that does the trying to...
surveying, yeah, maybe surveying.
Surveying, yeah.
Surveying.
And I had to hold this here, and he with the pictures, so I had a very good job because of Burek Meister, the one he was from our town. And I had two more brothers in that camp were starving, and I had this good job because the surveyor, was a young German, and he was not in the army, but because he had problems with heart or something, and he didn't have a very good appetite. So whatever food he had, sometimes he looked at me, and for a minute he treated me like a swine. he threw away the piece of bread, and I grabbed it from the floor, and I ate it. And he woke up like to say, my God, I never saw that before, I never saw that before. Anyway, I spoke German pretty well, and he told me, who are you? And so I said, well, he didn't care who I was, but more or less asked me. And one day he came in, he didn't have a very good appetite. He gave me a sandwich. I have to say it was not kosher. It was ham and cheese on a sandwich. So, and I ate it so fast, but I didn't make a moitze, you know. But anyway, so that helped me, and I gained weight. But the story ended in a different way. He gave me that machinery, or that photographic machinery, or whatever it was. You carry it with you to the camp, and I'll meet you tomorrow at the gate, and this way I don't have to carry it home. And I had an idea thinking, at that time I found some Polish women in the field. They were not in a concentration camp. They were working, getting paid, but working very hard, and they were digging potatoes. It was a potato field. And I was thinking, what do? I don't want to tell him, and I speak Polish fluently, so they said, in Polish, do you want some potatoes? I said, so she said to me, I'll throw it, or she knew I was starving, you know, I'll throw it that direction, and you pick it up so he won't see you. I picked up the potato this day and another day, and I brought it, and I took it into the equipment, was locked with my key, and I had to watch that nobody goes in there. But being hungry, my brothers being hungry, I wanted to bring something home. And they wouldn't check me on the so I told, one day I walked to the gate, and they said, what do you have inside? I said, I don't have the key. They said, it belongs to Mr. Pops, the engineer, the purveyor. Oh, okay, go. And I did it a few days. Then I said to myself, so I opened up the key, I opened up the thing and threw in some raw potatoes. I cleaned them as much as I could, raw potatoes, and I gave it to my brothers. And they ate the raw potatoes, I mean, no doubt. I mean, I would have eaten the same thing if I wouldn't have any food. And one day I came, the next day I came, and they decided, open the door, open this thing here, I want to see. They found a potato. It's a good thing they told Burek Meister, which was in charge, what they called the Judenältester. They told him, I want you to take care of this guy and beat him up, but good, teach him a lesson. And he said to me in Polish, I'm going to send you over there. He opened the windows so the Germans on the other side of the gate would hear you screaming, crying. And he says, he told those two Jewish guys that was their job, to beat you 25 lashes on your bare back and everything, and I mean bare. They hit me very lightly, and I screamed very loud, then I'm crying. The Germans over there were happy that I'm getting a beating, and I walked away. So that could have killed me, you know, at that time. I was skinny and weak already anyway, but I survived. This is one thing, and then other stuff came on.
Jerry, it occurs to me we passed over the opportunity to ask you about that moment in Sosnowiec, when you went to Sosnowiec with the two women. I think that's something.
I went where?
Sosnowiec.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell that story about the leather?
No. Well, my uncle was a dealer in shoe leather, and during the war, he used to sell it piecemeal, and people used to come from another town by, and that's what we lived on. And two young women came to buy it, but they couldn't take all of it. So they sent me along. They put some leather around my torso, and we went. But there was a raid at the railroad station as we arrived in the other town in Sosnowiec. And one of the guards touched me, and he felt the leather. He pulled it out from under me. He hit me over the head with it, and luckily I was able to run away. So people saw it
Lucky you.
at home in town. People were going back, told the story, and the whole family was frightened because they were afraid that I was arrested. And I'll get the address, and the Gestapo will come to the house. Luckily, they just let me run. They beat me up and they let me run away. So.
Okay, I want to turn to the end of the war and the last few days.
Last camp.
The last camp. So Flossenburg for you and Görlitz for you. Jerry, why don't you tell us about just a little bit about what Flossenburg was like, but then the last days when camp was evacuated.
There were shortages. The Germans themselves didn't have any more. There were shortages because the war was coming to an end. Things were not running smoothly. Trains weren't running anymore. So they had no food for us. And they evacuated us on foot from the camp. And we were marching, just walking. Was a few days, about 2 or 3 days, and without food and water. Luckily, the American army was already close by, and our guards ran away, and instantly, all of a sudden, we were free, without realizing what. So we went to all the farmers in the town, and they fed us. They had no choice. They were
So
afraid
just
of
like
us.
that,
Yeah.
you're prisoners marching, and all of a sudden, the way that Jerry told me the story on Sunday was all of a sudden they looked to their left, they looked to their right, there were no soldiers, there were no Nazis, and they were walking, and they just looked around and saw tanks in the distance and thought, are we free? It's like, what a moment to think, what do you do now? And Jerry, you stayed in a farmhouse. Many of you, hundreds of you, stayed in a farm for a while.
Yeah.
And a Polish farm woman,
No,
right?
it was a
Farmer?
German farm.
A German farm.
Yeah, it was a
And
Bavaria.
but the German woman who lived on that farm fed you,
Yeah.
right? Fed you, and many people
Oh,
died,
they
right?
we were undernourished after not eating so many days, and all of a sudden they gave us all this rich food,
Yeah,
made
people-
us sick.
Made them sick, and many died
Oh,
because their stomachs were not used to the food.
Wow.
And Dad, your last few days or moments
I
of the
can
war?
tell you my last few days. First of all, I want to tell you, I was not a very lucky man. I don't know, he probably was,
Well,
I'm saying he was liberated earlier than I was. I was liberated the last day of the war, and by the Russians, which they themselves didn't have much, but anyway, the point is, what happened to me, we used to go on a death march. Every time the Germans were pushed by the Russians, but the Russians was coming forward towards to the liberation. They used to take us for a march to save us because they needed us for building. Maybe they could still push the Russians back, the Russian front, but in some cases they couldn't. But one night we were sleeping in a farm overnight, and it was in January or February already. It was very cold. And they took us out from the camp on a march, and they figured if they push the Russians back, they'll take us back into the barracks and go on to the same thing. So what they did, once they pushed, once we came to the farm, we slept in a different farm places where the horses used to be and all that stuff, because the horses were gone. Anyway, we slept on the floor, and there was no room for everybody to sleep. No pillows, of course not. Just on the floor, on some whatever, straw or whatever. And so what we did, you learn how to survive. So I slept on somebody's stomach and somebody slept on my stomach with his head instead of pillows. The next morning I woke up and I take a look at him. I have his head on him and he's dead. And the first thing people ask me when they ask me this question, well, what did you do? What do you think I did? Well, I don't know. I took his shoes. I mean, this is how life was. People don't, you become like an animal. I mean, people say there was a shortage of food. There was no shortage. There was no food, period. And biggest thing was starvation. And also, as far as beatings, I had to watch my brothers. I forgot to tell that story. That was even before concentration camp. The three of us went to the farm in the middle of the night in January of 1939, 1940 winter. We were still living in the house, but only to go out once a day for an hour. So we took the armbands off, and at 2 o'clock in the morning we went to a farmland. We knew the farmer because she used to shop with us, with my mother and father, for different materials and stuff. We had a piece of material to make a suit or something like that, and we gave it to her to give us milk for Regina. My little sister was only 4 or 3 years old at the time, 3. And so she did that, and we carried the milk in those milk cans, whatever, in the middle of the night in a snowstorm, I mean after the snowstorm, deep in snow, and somebody squealed. They saw us at 4 o'clock in the morning in February or January, I don't remember exactly, and they told the Germans. They caught us, they took us to a gymnasium where the Germans had fun doing gymnastics and dance and whatever, and they called the whole town. Everybody wants to see what happens to the Jews when they don't obey. And there was a whole music going, and they told us, and one of the girls was sitting in the audience, and she was a neighbor of ours. Her boyfriend was a German soldier. And she said to the German soldier, please, you're gonna hit them, don't hit me, because I was at that time 14 years old, skinny already, and she knew our family, and he asked the people not to beat me, but they made me watch my brother. They were beating them for about 20 minutes to half an hour straight, having fun. They told them to do gymnastics. They're very, very, what do you call it, nice people, the Germans. They said, no, you don't have to take the pants off, just in your underwear. And they came home, they were in bed for 2 weeks, completely black they beat them with a whip that you use for lions. And they made me watch. This is the beginning. So there were times when I can tell you that you said to yourself, what's the difference being at home or being in a concentration camp? Maybe I get 3 meals a day, At that time it was only camp supposedly, but it was starvation. So.
Thank you. So, because the hour is late, we're going to ask them each to summarize the end of the war and how they came to America, and then we'll open it up for questions. We do have some slides that I think you might want to see, so we'll run them very briefly as well. Jerry, could you just summarize what happened after the war and how you came to this country? And
As I said, I read Avadi Mainu. So we can think of recent history also as Avadi Mainu. It's just our history just keeps continuing.
No, but how did you know?
yeah,
What
after
else can I say?
that's
Okay.
right.
Well,
After the war, Jerry, though, you were tapped by the Joint Distribution Committee, JDC, right? The Joint.
Yeah.
They found you, and they gave you a job in Munich, right? So can you just talk about what you did in Munich and how you came to America? And maybe why not Palestine or Israel? I think you were, or it was already 1948.
Well, I was
for you.
fortunate to get a job with American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, and that helped me learn English and some other skills. And it helped me become a mensch.
And Dad, at the end of the war.
That's about all I can. That's about all I can tell you.
Okay.
Well, at the end of the war, the only one survived, like I said, was myself.
Let everybody draw their own conclusions. That's the
Anyway.
best way.
Anyway, at the end of the war, the only one survived. Oh yeah, the only one survived is myself and my sister. And she was, like, I don't know if I mentioned it, she was very sick because she starved and she worked on a machine and whatever. She saved some postcards that she got. Anyway, that's not important. But anyway, when I came home. But it was from a concentration camp. I took different freight trains. It took me 150 miles, kilometers from Breslau to my home, Sztakowa, near Katowice, near Krakow. It took me 3 days to get home. When I got to about 20 kilometers from my home, somebody told me, "I have good news for you, your sister is alive. And she is in Sztakowa, where we used to live." I went to Sztakowa and I found out where those few Jewish girls that survived in that camp, huddling, more or less, being scared of the Russian soldiers, of rape and other stuff, skinny, tired, hungry, and they were all together, and they didn't get any help because it was a small town. And so what happened, I walked in and I looked at her, I couldn't recognize her. She had no teeth in her mouth, and she used to have teeth, and she had some of them that are crowns, that were gold. The Germans took it out because they needed it for the war. So here she was 23 years old, or 22 at the time, or something like that. And I looked, and I couldn't believe it. Swollen legs. She never worked a day in her life in this country. And she happens to be one that loves to work. Couldn't do anything because the feet were swollen, and nobody ever thought of going to welfare. This is not something we do. You know, so anyway, so so when I came here, I lived with her and her husband. She married in a DP camp and came here with a child already, and then she had another boy, and by the way, she passed away about 8 years ago in this country. Very sick, basically sick all the time.
Okay. So I know there's so much more we could say and so many questions I have, and I'm sure some of you have, but of course, this is an evening program. We are going to open it to questions. I'd like to show the slides while people are thinking about their questions, and then we'll do a little bit of questions, and then we'll go outside to light candles and to say, oh, we're lighting in here and saying Kel Malei Rachamim. So Sarah, would you mind doing that? I'm not actually going to speak except for one slide because I want to put it into context. So you can read the captions.
A little slower.
Oh, sure.
So, just so we can.
Sure, of course. Do you want me to read them? I'll read them. So the first one was 1934, a picture, school picture in Sztakowa. My father here is the top right child, and he was around, I guess, 8 years old. He's wearing a cap on his head. And that's a public school picture. This one is another school picture from about 1937 or 38, so just before the war, and we have 3 of my father's siblings. All of the first set, by the way, is my father's, and then we'll see some of Jerry's. All of the pictures from before the war that we have were saved by his sister Sala, who is the one who survived, and was able carried them, for all of these years through the war, and hid them. She buried them underneath the machine that she worked on every day. And it just boggles my mind that they survived. So 3 of his siblings are there, and these are really the only looks that I could ever have of any of my family. I have no siblings, I had no grandparents because they were all murdered, and this is all I have to show for my family, for my children. So this is Sarah, his sister who did survive, and his brother Yassel, who did not survive. And that was in Shakova, 1937. This is my grandmother, Rosa, about 1937 or 8. This is my father's mother. And she looks one way here and very different, I think, in the very next picture. You'll see this is also her seated. And
That's my sister.
and that is also Sala, or Sarah, who survived. And you can see she always was a beautiful woman, and she passed away the day
Notice a
after
band she
Hadass was
wearing
born.
on her arm. That was
Yeah, so
already
this is the
worn.
story I wanted to tell, that my father always told me that my grandmother said, "Come on, Sala, we're going to take a picture, get dressed."
She had
And
a feeling.
what?
She had a feeling it's going.
She said, we're gonna go take a picture, we're going to, they had a photographer's, studio or home. So they went there, and the photographer said to my grandmother, "Take off the arm badge, you don't want that on there." And she said, "Oh no, that's why I'm here." And put her arm like that to make sure. And it's one of the only pictures that survived. One of the only pictures that survived.
My mother was
That's
ashamed too.
very special. And she was wearing a sheitel, my father just wanted to say. So this is a postcard, and actually I have here with me, if anybody wants to look at, after a number of postcards, I think 8 or 10 of them actually, that survived, that Sala kept. They're all written, of course, to Sala, and all written in German, because they were, if you notice, the Z stamp, that means censored. It was censored by the Nazis, so we've translated most of the ones that we could read, and most of them you could see it says, things are not a bed of roses, things like that, sayings like it's not so great here, but we're fine, we're okay, we haven't heard from anybody, but we're okay. So they were all censored, and you can see the stamp of Hitler on there. And you're welcome to come and look at them after. Please keep them in the plastics, of course, in the covers. This is after the war, 1945 or 46, in Bavaria, Germany. These are, my father's not in this picture, but these are all of our cousins. All of my father's side of the side of the family that stayed in the town where he was born, Dukla, all of them survived. Maybe there was somebody who didn't, but they all survived in Siberia. They all went east to Russia, whereas my father was, in the heart of what was going on. They all survived. They all went to Palestine. And when my father, at the end of the war, he really wanted to go to Palestine, and my aunt Sala said, "Oh no, there's a war. We're fighting for a homeland, but you're not going because I'm not losing you." So he ended up in America, and they all ended up in Israel. And today we have about, I would say, 150 to 200 cousins in Israel from 5 siblings, those 5 siblings. This is my father right after the war in Bad Gastein, Austria, 1946.
And had hair.
Again. Okay, same thing. And this is his naturalization certificate to the United States in 1954. So, and now I think we're turning to Jerry's pictures. This is a picture of Jerry's mother,
What's my
Felicia,
mother?
in Bielsko-Biała.
Oh, how did he get the picture? Yeah.
He had it.
Did
Well,
you ask him?
Jerry, how are your pictures preserved?
How did you preserve the
What's my
pictures?
mother?
No, I mean,
Okay, he's having a moment. We'll ask him after. This is Jerry's cousin, Natalia.
My aunt and my uncle.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That Cuba,
Yeah.
Jerry. That Cuba on the other end.
Yeah.
His sister, Rosa, with baby cousin,
That's my
Bracha.
sister and Brucha, our cousin. The child did not survive.
And Jerry's father, Yoel, or Joel. And your father did survive, Jerry's father did survive, and they found each other through their cousins in London that they both wrote to and identified that they were both alive. And this is a happier moment when Ruza was married to the ship officer on Aliyah Bet, which she was on. And this wasn't actually on the Aliyah Bet ship, it was sometime later, but this was in 1950 in Israel.
Walter, he conducted many Aliyah Beit immigration into Israel before the state became,
I think there's one more, and this is Jerry's declaration. It's called Declaration of Intention. I don't know the nuances, but also to become a citizen in 1950. And you can see Jerry's picture there. And- what? And then the last picture, I think it is, this is a picture of the Shakova Landsmannschaft in the late 60s or early 70s in Hartford, Connecticut. And my father is in the picture, Jerry's in the picture, and Sala and her husband Sam are in that picture, along with several of their dear friends from Shakova who survived, many of whom are not with us anymore. So I want to thank Jerry and Aaron for, I know what was very difficult to talk about, but also just to witness their amazing spirits, and to be able to have the strength to share and to want to share is really special. And I'm grateful to all of you for being here. My children are here. I'm so happy they're here. And thank you. And we'll take some questions if people have a few minutes. Any questions? Sarah?
Your dad just share what he, to this day, is still doing?
We used to have many reunions after the war in New York. And people used to come from other towns, from Connecticut. And every year we had a reunion.
Yeah. There was a question, Dad, to you about what you do every day.
What do every day? Well,
Go ahead.
I'm in the store all day.
In the store. Go ahead, tell them.
And
Speak up.
in between doing nothing, I usually read.
No. I think he's missing the point. You're missing the point of the question. The point is he works every single day. He and my mom own a children's clothing store in Norwood, Massachusetts, where he works every single day. So I don't know what this doing nothing is. He works every day. And by the way, when he's not working, he's speaking. So, and I've noticed, Dad, that even though I grew up with tons of stories all the time, sometimes very difficult even as a child, I've noticed that in the last, let's say, 10 years, it's almost like a race against the clock. Like, tell every story to every person you could ever meet, because this is the time, this is the moment.
I like to say, I just want to say this here. All of you, I know do we have a problem now with Facebook? What do you call it, Facebook?
I don't have a
But
problem.
this was actually very good for me because I used to tell people, you don't have to mention my name. Just make sure you heard somebody talk. Send them a picture. People should not forget because it's so easy to forget. Before you know, you've forgotten when is the next Hoban coming, as they say.
Daniel, and then Emily.
To what do you attribute your survival?
Actually,
Did you
my
hear that?
survival, well,
And
first
then
of all,
the-
the first thing you mean how I survived because I survived? Well, I'll tell you, many a times I would, is this okay?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Many a times I said to myself, I wish somebody would just kill me but quickly without pain and get it over with. And then I said to myself, my God, if I do this here, maybe my brothers are alive. Maybe, maybe tomorrow, maybe I'll find them or whatever. And you want to live another day, maybe things will get better. It's very tough to really make up your mind to unless you're on drugs and you kill yourself. But otherwise, you just want to live because you have good days, bad days, and you just do this. And as far as surviving, you learn. You like I told you. Just tell you that I told him a story about I woke up and somebody was underneath me.
Yeah.
Like in that thing when we were almost dead. The war was almost over. We saw the Germans coming with frozen legs and falling from the Russian front. But in the same time, it was so bad. The last 6 weeks, our camp was liberated the last day of the war. And people hate me when I say, I wish I was in Auschwitz. The people in Auschwitz, the ones that survived in January of 1945. From January 1945 to May, in my camp, there were 6,000 Jews and only 4,000 survived, besides the ones that died before, but that's beside the point. I'm just trying to tell you how bad it was in that particular day. I survived because I found a niche. It's a long story, which is a funny story in some ways, but it's a story of survival. I found a job. Okay, I have to tell you that story.
Okay, tell the story.
In the last camp, I was already an expert of survival because it was my 9th camp. At that camp, there was a German in charge, and he was what they call a capo, but he was a criminal from before the war. He killed his own grandmother, and he was crazy. And there was a roll call, and I looked at the roll call, and I had to walk 10 miles. It was already winter time, almost winter, and I was so skinny already and so weak, and I wished somebody would kill me. So I went to the infirmary. You have a right to do it. If let's say you're bleeding, they don't want you to die because they need you to work. So I took a thermometer. He says, what's the matter with you? I feel weak, I'm sick. And the doctor was a Jew, but he was a Hungarian Jew. He didn't understand no German or English or German. And he said to me, they're going to kill you if you go fake. So I took the thermometer and rubbed it underneath and made it to go to 101, whatever you call it, over in Poland, 41 or something. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay, so I made this here, and they told me, okay, you can stay home. The reason I did that, because I saw the kitchen was near my barrack. And I decided, I grabbed like a broom made out of straw or something, and I swept the floor near the kitchen. And that German passed by looking for me because roll call, I didn't show up. So he went towards my barrack where I was. And I know he was crazy, he was a killer, but crazy. And I spoke German very well, so I understood what he said. And he said to me, "Was machst du da? What are you doing here?" I said, you told me to sweep the floor. I told him, see, at the age of 19, 20, I already learned how to survive. So he says, I did. So he hit me with the whip. Mach schnell, make quickly, work faster. You know, verfluchte Jude, you damn Jew, or something like that. So I started to sweep quickly. In the meantime, I knew where the kitchen people are sleeping at 10 o'clock because they're already prepared for dinner, or they're sleeping after breakfast, then to make dinner. So I figured I'm going to sweep near the kitchen, and when they sleep, I was small and skinny, and I knew where the potato soup is. I stuck my hand into the soup, I almost burned myself, and grabbed potatoes, and that's like penicillin. I started to gain weight and got stronger. To make the story short, after that I started to steal hot water. Does it make sense to you? Probably not. Anyway, the same pot that we ate in, sometimes, excuse me, we also did whatever we had to do. So I decided I am going to steal this year and save it, give it to a friend of mine, Kalmer. Kalmer wasn't it? Do you remember Kalmer? Anyway, so I gave him some, and then others found out I have soup. I said, look, I'll give you the soup if you give me the bread. The bread, even if it gets old, I can still sell it for something else. So I put it in my pocket, I gave him the soup. Some of them, then I stole hot water and sold it to the people that had extra food, like the supervisors, which were Jewish too. I said, okay. Anyway, I gained weight. So when the death march came and the Russian front was coming forward, I survived. And what happened in one of the places we stayed, in a farmhouse, because they had kept us there, and when they pushed the Russian front back, they brought us back. So every time we went, the 6,000 of us went, they killed a friend of mine. They shot him because he couldn't walk anymore, and he held on to me. So I said, no, the Ukrainian he couldn't even speak English, a German rather. But he hated Jews anyway, so you let go of him or I'm going to kill you too. And he pushed him down a ravine, he died, and I kept walking. Then we slept on the floor, and then I told him a story about, we slept on one each other.
Yeah,
What?
you told that story.
Yeah, I did tell a story
Yeah.
about sleeping, and he woke up and he was dead. Anyway,
As we will read, as I say, Abadim Hainu.
yeah.
Emily, did you have a final question? And then I think they'll be available after. if you want.
I'm wondering if either of you have been back to Poland
Are we done?
or ever had any desire
One
to
last question. Yeah.
go back.
Yeah. Jerry, have you been back to Poland? Have you been back to Poland since the war?
Not in a long time.
No,
But
mean,
I have after the war. Yeah.
You did? And in what context? Did you go with family or?
No, I met some people that we knew, but it's a long time ago. I haven't been, not recently.
no.
When
I
you
have
went?
No reason to go. I have no interest.
What
in
year
going.
did you go? What year did you go? What year? When?
Well, I have no reason to go that.
No.
But when did you go back? When was it? When was it?
Oh, I don't remember. Many years ago. So
Just to see the town, or?
about 25 years at least.
Mhm. Okay. And Dad?
Well, I've been in Poland, yeah. I was in Poland twice.
You gotta talk
Actually,
louder.
I went back to
If I have
Poland.
the time and the money, I'd rather go to Israel.
Anyway, I went to Poland because I still felt that I wanted to see what it's like, and maybe I could find somebody in my town that maybe survived concentration camp and lived in, but I couldn't find anybody there. I went back because I wanted to see Poland and Krakow and how things are, and also,
We went.
and my daughter worked in Poland too, so there was another reason for me to go. she worked in the Auschwitz Jewish Foundation or whatever. So that's her story to tell. So.
I won't tell the whole story, but the short story is
Yeah.
that when I was working in, when I was doing research in Poland, I went back to the town. My dad had never wanted to go. It's not that he didn't want to, but he said, nah, I don't need to. And I went, and I suddenly found myself in Szczekova, where I knew literally where everything was, because I had, based on his story, drawn a map of the town, and we had marked everything up. So when we drove into the center of town, I had a driver with me. We drove there. I said, oh my God, the shul is going to be right there, and the civic center that my father built with his hands is going to be right there. This is going to be where the tree where Aaron Diamant was hanged, and I found every single marker there or actual thing, his house. And I went to the nearest town a few days later. It's a very long story, but the short is that I went to the town over because there were no phones in Szczekova. This was in 1995, and there were no phones there. And I went to the nearest bigger town, and I called home, and I said, Dad, I'm living in a house with a Polish woman. That's the story for another time. And I'm looking at your house every morning. I wake up and I open the curtains and I see your house. And I said, you have to come. And he got on a plane and came, and we spent 2 weeks. And we really turned over every stone, as they say, but also visited so many stones. So thank you. Yeah.
Question, has anyone here been to Poland?
Are we done?
I was curious as to how many.
A number of people, I guess.
But,
Yeah, how many people have been to Poland? So,
Yeah.
well, so I'm going to end it only because the hour's late, though I think we could go on. So thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, we are gonna say a prayer now, and I know there is at least one other survivor in the room, and I want to just honor you if you would like to come light a candle, and if there is another survivor, please come up, light a candle. Survivor of any age, of any experience, please.
Everybody will rise for the candle.
Come on down. That's not funny. It's not funny. Come down. Dad, come down. You're gonna come light a candle. We're going to have a little second and third generation to light the other one. You like that? Hold it there for a second. Okay, what's that? Okay. I'll do it on our behalf.
El Malei Rachamim, Dayan Almanot Ve'avi Yetomim, El Nat Cheshev Titapak, Ladam Yisrael, Shenishvach Kamayim, Amtzei Menucha Nechona, Al Kanfei Hashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Utorim, Zohar Harakia, Me'irim Umazahirim, Lenishmotehem, Shel Ribavot Alfei Yisrael, Anashim, V'nashim, Yiladim V'yiladot, Shenehergu, V'nishchatu, Shenisrefu, V'nechneku, V'nikberu Chaim, Baratzot asher naga bahen, Yad hatzorer hagermani ubrurav, Kulam kedoshim utorim, Uvahem geonim v'tzadikim. Arzei halvanon, Adirei haTorah, Began Eden te menuchatam, Lachein bal harachamim, Yastirem beseter kenafav liolamim, Yitzror b'tzror chaim et nishmatam, Adonai hu nachlatam, Ve'anuchu v'shalom al mishkavam, V'nomar Amen.
Amen.